Welcome back, and today I will be going through my predicted champion for every single UFC division by the end of 2026. And this year, every single division had a new champion besides two, with Alex Perez staying with the belt and also Valentina Shevchenko staying with the belt. Now, these ones are very hard to predict, but if you can get right, there are a ton of value on these bets and there's a lot of money to be made. So I have locked all my bets for the future champions inside my premium Discord, and let's get through my predictions. These are not who I'm betting on, but just who I think will become champion by the end of the year. Now let's get into it, starting with the women's strawweight division. I think Zhang Weili gets her belt back. Now I know she did look pretty bad in that fight against Valentina Shevchenko, but she was too small in that fight. Flyweight, ultimately, it's not her division. Strawweight, she is a very dominant champion, and Mackenzie Dern is just, in my opinion, extremely likely to be in that position. She's lost to so many fighters in that division, and I just thought she matched up really well against Virna Jandiroba, considering Jandiroba is a jiu-jitsu artist and Mackenzie Dern can match her there and slightly outdo her on the feet. I think it's a perfect matchup for Dern, but I still think Dern loses to a lot of fighters in that division, and she already has. I think she could lose to Suarez. She probably loses to Lemos again. A lot of tough matchups in that division where she could definitely lose. And what I think will likely happen is Zhang Weili will move back down. That's kind of what I'm hoping to happen. I don't think she's going to try and stay up at flyweight. I think the UFC gives her deserved immediate title shot. And in that immediate title shot, I think she will absolutely run through Mackenzie Dern. And I think she either dominates her by decision or could even potentially find a finish. I think she's better than Dern everywhere. And I think that fight likely happens mid to later next year. Maybe Weili gets another title defense, but ultimately, I think we've seen this before. Weili doesn't lose in strawweight, and I think she will get her belt back in end 2026 as the champion. And even if you look at the odds, they're actually favoring Mackenzie Dern to stay the champion in that division, which, in my opinion, I don't understand. Maybe they know something that we don't, that Dern might not even fight next year, or that Weili's staying up at flyweight, something like that. But yeah, I do not know what the odds makers are doing here, and it is surprising to me. Next division is the women's flyweight division, and I'm going with Natalia Silva to end the year as champion. Now, Shevchenko has been very dominant in the division. She had a very good year last year. She beat Manon Fiorot. She beat Zhang Weili in a fight where she looked good. But I think Natalia Silva here, she's going to beat Rose Namajunas in January, and she will definitely get a title shot mid to later next year. And I think that is a very competitive fight. Natalia Silva is one of the only fighters who can match Valentina Shevchenko at kickboxing range, in my opinion. I think she's also very big, athletic, and strong, which is where Shevchenko can take advantage of a lot of other flyweights. So I think that's going to be a competitive fight. I think Silva may even have the striking advantage, which is pretty crazy to say against Shevchenko. Shevchenko definitely does have the grappling, and she has been leaning towards her grappling, especially as she has got older. I think that's a very close fight, and I think considering Silva likely gets a title shot towards the end of the year, I think this is very live. And another thing is, Shevchenko has stated that she wants to move up to bantamweight, and I could definitely see the UFC booking her against the winner of that Nunes and Harrison fight, especially if it's Nunes, because they do have some history and some very close fights. And if that happens, Silva will likely fight in a vacant title fight in late 2026. So either way you put it, I think Silva gets a title shot, and I think she has a very good chance at winning. So she is going to be my prediction for the 2026 end of year flyweight champion. Next, we got the women's bantamweight division, and I'm going with Kayla Harrison to get this one done. I think Kayla Harrison is going to beat Amanda Nunes. I know Nunes is probably the GOAT of WMMA, but in my opinion, as an early lean, I like Harrison. She's been more active. She's been the one getting the wins, and I do not know Nunes, what her motivation is coming into this fight. I think she probably defends again against another bantamweight, maybe Norma Dumont, or like I said just before, maybe against Shevchenko. I think she wins again. I think her wrestling is very good. I think she is very big. She's very dominant in the UFC women's bantamweight division. She may actually retire this year, which is a possibility because she is pretty old, and I know the weight cut is very brutal. If she could probably retire after that Nunes fight, but I think Kayla Harrison is the logical pick, and I'm going to pick Kayla Harrison to end 2026 as the women's UFC bantamweight champion. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In the men's division, starting off with flyweight, I'm going to pick Tatsuro Taira to end the year as champion, but in my opinion, flyweight's probably one of the hardest ones to predict, simply because the title picture is just so crazy at the moment with with Pantoja's injury, we don't know who's fighting who next. We don't know who's getting the title shot, when Pantoja's coming back. So it's all a bit of a mess. But what I think is most likely to happen is Joshua Van will fight and defend his belt early to mid next year, either against Tatsuro Taira or Manel Kape. And I'm not sure who the UFC will give it to, but I think it is probably going to be Manel Kape. Not sure. And even then, that's a very tough fight for Van. Also a tough fight for Kape. That one could definitely go either way. Then from there, I think if Pantoja is healthy, they'll probably put him back in. That is a big if. That was a very bad injury, and Pantoja will probably go in there against either Joshua Van or Manel Kape, and that is going to be competitive either way. So it's very hard to pick who's going to win these fights. Or the UFC could give Taira the title shot against Van early, or Taira could get a title shot late. Either way, I don't know. The reason I'm picking Taira is just because I like his game so much. I think his grappling is very good. The way he matches up stylistically against Joshua Van as a very grappling heavy fighter, and also against Kape, who we have seen lose to grapplers before. So Taira's going to be the pick here. For me, I understand if you're picking any of the four, Pantoja, Van, Kape, Taira, all of them have a legitimate shot, and it's a very hard division to predict, in my opinion. Next, we are going with bantamweight, and my prediction is going to be Umar Nurmagomedov to end the year as the 2026 bantamweight champion. Now, that is a bit of a hot take. I understand that, but this is what I think happens in the title picture. I think the UFC are going to run Peter Yan versus Merab pretty early next year, and I know you can't ever count out Merab. We've seen it time and time again, but I think Yan wins again. I think he sorted out Merab's game, and he is the answer for Merab. I think Yan wins that fight, and I think Yan defends his belt one more time in the end of the year, and I think that's either going to be against Sean O'Malley or Umar Nurmagomedov. And this really depends what the UFC goes with, because both of them are fighting in that January card. I think Umar will probably be more deserving. He will be on the 2-fight win streak, and also a fresh matchup for Yan. But if Sean O'Malley goes out there, looks good against Song, I could definitely see the UFC booking that massive Sean O'Malley versus Peter Yan to rematch. So either Umar or Sean will most likely fight Yan at the end of the year. And as far as who I think wins, I think Sean O'Malley versus Peter Yan will be another competitive fight. I know a lot of people call robbery on that first fight. I understand if you think Yan won, but you can't deny it was a very competitive fight. So I think either one of those fighters could win. And if it's Umar, which I think is a 50-50 if it's going to be Sean or Umar, I like the way Umar actually matches up against Yan. I think Umar's a better wrestler than Merab. So I think he could take Yan down. Obviously, Yan's a great grappler himself. I just think that's a very technical, high-level matchup. And I think Umar could edge it out, but Peter Yan could also definitely win. I like Umar, though, to end the year as the champion. I think he will fulfill the father's plan, and I think he gets this one done and ends the year in 2026 as the UFC bantamweight champion. But either Peter Yan, Sean O'Malley, Umar, or even Merab, they could all end the year as champ. So it's another tricky one to predict, in my opinion. Now, featherweight, I think Volkanovski will remain with the 145-pound belt, but it is a very tough one to pick, and a lot of uncertainty in this prediction as well. So Volk is fighting Lopez early on next year, and we have already seen that fight. And Volkanovski was winning for most of it, but had a lot of hairy moments, and it was still competitive. A year later, we get the same fight. Volk hasn't fought. Lopez had that fight against Silva. He got a nice, crazy finish, but he didn't really show any improvements in his game, and he looked like he was getting touched up against Silva as well in that round too. So in this fight, Lopez absolutely has a chance to go out here and finish Volk the same way he did in this first fight. But if you're picking logically, I think you have to pick Volk, considering we've seen the fight before. So I do think Volk will beat Lopez, and I think Volk is going to look to defend his belt one more time. Or there is a chance he retires after that Lopez fight, but I don't think he'll do it just then. So I think he looks to defend the belt at least once more in 2026, and that could either be against Movsar Evloev, Lerone Murphy, or Yair Rodriguez. Those are the three fighters that I think are most likely to fight Volk, and I think Volk could probably beat all of them. All of them possess tough stylistic matchups, especially Movsar, but I do think Volk is good enough to do it. And if you're going to pick who's going to be the champion at the end of the year, I think Volk is the pick, but it's a hard one to pick, and considering Volk could also retire, it makes it even trickier. So a lot of fighters could be the featherweight champion by the end of 2026, but I'm going to ride with Alexander Volkanovski. Next, for lightweight, I am going to say Ilia Topuria stays the lightweight champion in 2026. But this is another one of those divisions where who knows what is going to happen. As you've probably heard, Ilya is having some serious problems with his wife and his kids and all that. It's just not a great situation. And honestly, I could see Ilya Topuria not fighting at all in 2026. I think that is a real possibility. And I think it could be a very, very bad situation and how everything unfolds. So first, you got Gaethje and Pimblett fighting for the interim title. I haven't really watched tape for that one yet. I'm leaning Pimblett, but I actually think it's a pretty close fight. But either way, either one of those fighters is going to get the interim belt. Let's say Pimblett wins it. Then either they will fight Ilya Topuria mid to late, most likely late 2026. And if Ilya actually fights them, I think Ilya will easily win. And I think he will end the year as 2026 champion. But what I could see happening is Paddy Pimblett could get the interim belt and he could get promoted to lightweight champion. And then from there, Paddy will either fight someone like Armin, Holloway, or Charles Oliveira. And that is just super unpredictable who he could fight and who he beats and who he loses. So in that division, it really all depends on what Ilya Topuria is going to do, if he's going to fight, who he's going to fight. And I think Ilya Topuria is the best lightweight in that division by a long shot. And I think Armin is the only real challenge for him in that division. So if Ilya does come back and fight, I think he is a logical pick. But it is kind of a mess at the moment. And a lot of fighters could end up champion in the end of 2026 at lightweight. Next, we're moving on to welterweight. In my opinion, this is the easiest one to predict. I am going with Islam Makhachev to end the year of 2026 as welterweight champion yet again. And also as pound for pound #1, making it 3 years in a row. Islam is most likely going to fight Usman early next year. I think it's rumored for UFC 327. I think Islam wins that one pretty easily. I know it's crazy to count out Kamaru Usman. He definitely has good grappling and he is very big, but Islam's overall game just should be too much for Kamaru Usman. And Islam usually fights twice a year, which lines him up perfectly to defend his belt once more at the end of the year. And that's probably going to be against Ian Gary, but it could be against Morales, Prates, even Shavkat. We don't really know. I think he probably beats all of them. They are difficult matchups, but I just think Islam Makhachev is that good. Now, my only concern here is I could actually see Islam retiring. He stated not too long ago that he only wants to fight 3 more times and then retire. And if he wins the belt mid this year or early, I could see him retiring. He has cemented his legacy as one of the greatest fighters of all time. So that is my concern, that he retires early and he doesn't end the year with the belt. But let's say he fights twice. He ends the year 2026 with the welterweight division championship, and I think that is what is going to happen. And he will also end as pound for pound #1 yet again. Now moving on to the middleweight division, I think Khamzat Chimaev will retain his middleweight title by the end of 2026. And this is similar to the Islam one. I just think Khamzat Chimaev is levels above any middleweight in that division, and I think it's even more extreme than Islam Makhachev and the other welterweights. His grappling is just too good. DDP is actually a pretty strong wrestler. He may not be the best grappler on the ground, but he can wrestle. We've seen that, and he made it look so easy. What's most likely going to happen is he's going to fight a Marvov mid next year. And I know I've heard some things that Marvov does not want to fight Khamzat Chimaev because they're both Muslims or they're friends or whatever, but I think that fight will happen. And I just think he beats Marvov very easily. I know Marvov is a good fighter, but Khamzat is just too good on the ground. And then I only think Khamzat will probably fight once next year. But if he defends maybe against Hernandez or Strickland, I think he beats them both. My only concern here as well is if he moves up to light heavyweight. He has stated that he doesn't want to move up to light heavyweight, which could force him to vacate the title. But I still think he's a pretty new champion. I don't think the UFC will allow him to do that just yet. So I think he defends the belt once against Marvov, wins that one pretty easily, and remains the middleweight champion by the end of 2026. Next, for the light heavyweight division, I am going to go with Carlos Ulberg to end 2026 as the UFC light heavyweight champion. Now that is a pretty hot take, but I'm going to explain what I think will happen in that division next year. Carlos Ulberg is probably the #1 rightful contender. He's the only one that really makes sense for Alex Pereira to defend the belt against next year. And if they fight, that will probably be early to mid next year. But I don't think Alex Pereira is going to fight him. I think Alex Pereira has earned his stripes at light heavyweight. He's beat everyone, and he deserves to move up to heavyweight, and that's what he wants to do. And he's a massive superstar, so I don't see why the UFC wouldn't push him up to heavyweight. That leaves Carlos Ulberg and Yuri Prochazka as the two guys to fight for the vacant light heavyweight title, which is what I think is going to happen probably mid next year. And that fight is very competitive. It's Carlos Ulberg, the more technical counter striker, and Yuri Prohaska, just the guy that refuses to quit and can knock anyone out. I think it's a pretty 50-50 fight, but I'm going to lean with Carlos Ulberg. And from there, that he could defend the belt maybe once, but I think that's probably going to be the only light heavyweight title fight that year. So I think it's probably going to be Carlos Ulberg or Yuri Prohaska as a champion, and I'm going to lean towards Carlos Ulberg as champ. Now, if Alex Pereira stays in that division, I do think Alex Pereira does beat everyone, including Ulberg, and probably knocks him out. But I do not think at Alex Pereira's age that he has much of a desire to stay at light heavyweight. So therefore, I think Carlos Ulberg will finish 2026 as the light heavyweight champion. That is pretty low confidence though. Next, heavyweight division. I'm going with Alex Pereira to end the year as the 2026 heavyweight champion. And the odds for this right now are currently pretty insane for how likely I think it could be. Obviously, the UFC are probably going to look to book Aspinall versus Gane 2. If Aspinall recovers early enough, that fight could happen earlier to mid-2026. But what I think could possibly happen is maybe an interim or number one contenders fight between Cyril Gane and Alex Pereira. And that is going to be a great fight, but I honestly think Alex Pereira could probably beat Cyril Gane. I know that's crazy to say, him moving up 3 divisions and beating a heavyweight, but I think he could do it. I think he's just as big as Gane, maybe a little bit smaller muscle-wise, but frame-wise, size-wise, I think he's just as big. I think he's definitely a harder puncher, and I think he could beat Cyril Gane, which lines him up to fight Tom Aspinall perfectly late 2026 for the heavyweight title. And I know his grappling is still questionable against a heavyweight like Tom Aspinall, but on the feet, he really could catch Tom Aspinall. We've seen his defense. His defense has never been very good. He is very powerful, he's very quick, but he always blitzes in with his chin up in the air, and Poatan has that insane power, and he is absolutely live for a knockout in that matchup. Also, if the UFC do book the Gane versus Aspinall matchup earlier in the year, that leaves Pereira lined up perfectly to move up and fight the winner. So I think that is another option. I think there's a very real chance Pereira does end up getting a heavyweight title shot next year, and I think there's a very real chance he wins. So at these insane plus money odds, and I do think Pereira does have the power. He has a skill set to do the absolute unthinkable and become triple champion, and I'm going to predict Pereira to become the heavyweight champion at the end of 2026. Now, if you don't just want my predictions and you want all of my futures bets, which I have posted inside the Discord and in my premium zone, then you know what to do. Join today. Click the link in the comments down below or in the bio, and let's make you some money betting on the UFC in 2026. Let's go, and happy Christmas.